That's Nick.
And that's Joseph. And today we're here to talk about Things Heard and Seen. It's the sixth film directed by the directing duo Shari Berman and Robert Pulcini, which Netflix is releasing April 29th, 2021.
Tell us about these people's other films.
They are a pair of documentary filmmakers who are probably still best remembered for their Oscar-nominated narrative debut, American Splendor, from 2003, starring Paul Giamatti. Since then, they've done kind of worked in that very familiar, not to be disparaging, but kind of hokey American indie lane, with a lot of stuff that I've felt very so-so about, including Girl Most Likely To, starring Kristen Wiig. They did do the Nanny Diaries with Scarlett Johansson. I really intensely disliked their 2010 film, The Extra Man, starring Kevin Kline. Although I might have just been having a bad day back then in 2010. But so, all that to say, I was actually very surprised at how much I really enjoyed this film, which is based on a 2017 book by Elizabeth Brundage called All Things Come to Appear.
Okay. The basic story is there's a couple, George and Catherine. George is played by
James Norton.
And Catherine is played by Amanda Seyfried. They have a little daughter named Franny, who's played by
Anna Sophia Hegger.
Okay, so it's set in like 1980. They're in New York, and we find them at a going away party. And what's happening is George accepted a position at a small little private college, in more rural New York,
Hudson Valley area, at a place called Saginaw College.
So they get there. The house they move into has a history, sort of a dark past.
Don't we all?
Yeah. And to kind of make it short, we start to see that George is not who we think he is. And also not who his wife, Catherine, thinks he is. He's cheating on her with a student at the college. He has lied about... So he had just earned his PhD, and that's why he's taking this like adjunct professor role. And he's an art teacher. And some of the art, the beautiful art that he hangs up in his office and that he's told everyone is his, actually belongs to his dead cousin who committed suicide.
And was gay.
And happened to be gay. He also has lied to get the job at the college. He's forged a letter of recommendation. Mm-hmm. So as all these lies start to unravel, we find out that the house has sort of a spirit that seems to want to warn the occupants of deception occurring. So like when they're in the house and George is lying to Catherine, there seems to be sort of like an emotional response from the house in an attempt to warn her. She also hears voices and starts to see weird things, and weird things happen. George's boss, who's played by
F. Murray Abraham, the Oscar winner for Amadeus.
You'll get into all like the quote from the beginning, but just to make it short, this boss, who's like the dean of the college George works at, he sort of believes in like supernatural stuff. Mm-hmm. So he approaches Catherine one day when he visits the house and tells her like, you're seeing things, aren't you? And you're hearing things. Well, it's real. Let me tell you what's going on. We're going to come over one day when George is not around and have a seance.
Well, it kind of goes like this. She's alone with him for a second and he's like, there's something here, isn't there?
Yeah. Which was a good scene. Uh-huh. Okay. So as George's lies start to unravel, he tries to put out the fires by like his boss who says he's going to report him to HR for lying about the letter of recommendation. George kills him. Mm-hmm. The coworker who he's sleeping with a student, but there's a coworker who he also has a flirtation with. She finds out that George is cheating or having sex with this student and threatens to tell. So George tries to kill her by running her off the road. He's not successful. But the final straw is Catherine, his wife, says, I know what you did to your boss on the night that she was planning on like leaving him. Mm-hmm. So she had packed up and got the daughter ready and they were going to like run out. And George kills her. Okay. So that's the basic story, but the film starts with like a movie projector projecting an image of like a farm or
A painting.
a painting
Pastoral.
that turns into a scene, which is George driving up to the house that they've moved into. And the opening scene is him driving into the garage or the carport. Blood drips on his car. He runs upstairs and sees his daughter by herself, which is also the end of the film because George has killed Catherine, left her in the house, and then the daughter was left there by herself. He did all that to create an alibi. Okay, so when George, at the end of the film, this like thing in the house is calling him to like go out to the river.
Well, there's kind of two different spirits going on in the house as well, but yeah.
And he goes out to the river and then he sort of like vanishes into a painting, and it's a painting that he had in his office. One of the paintings he stole from his gay dead cousin.
Fate.
So I think it's like there's this metaphysical realm, this alternate universe, also this sort of like spiritual, like ghostly type thing. There's a lot going on.
There is.
That we didn't mention, but it made for like a really rich story. My overall thought about this film was it felt like sort of like a demented soap opera.
Sure.
Yeah.
To me, it reminded me of stuff that we would see coming out of the 1970s, like really interesting texture stories where characters used to matter and not box office per se. I had so many references I was thinking of, including there's this Thomas Tryon novel I really like called Harvest Home, which got a TV movie version with Bette Davis in the 70s, but if that's an interesting novel. Or The Stepford Wives, of course, came to mind. This patriarch bringing his wife to this town where she's slowly consumed by his needs and greed. It opens with and this is kind of the overarching theme and motif. It opens with a quote from this Swedish 17th century mystic Emanuel Swedenborg. And I didn't write the quote down, but it's basically something implying...
everything in the natural world has its counterpart. No, that's what
it's interpreted
I thought I wrote that quote down. Oh well.
You paused it and were perplexed. That's what I remember.
I was
and I'm
confused
like, we're going to get
quote.
into it later. And it gets sussed out a bit in the script, and I thought in ways that didn't seem clunky, because it turns out in George's dissertation, which F. Murray Abraham comments on and automatically sets up a juxtaposition between both their characters. He's like, basically, you were chosen for this one small part of your dissertation where you're talking about Swedenborg's relationship with this painter named George Inness, because Swedenborg wrote this famous text about heaven and hell, and basically the energies that lead one towards heaven versus towards hell, which also relates to these dead spirits in the house, a male and a female, and those who gravitate towards the bad or the negative can be influenced by the bad spirit and vice versa. But anyways, Swedenborg and Inness basically was painting the themes and motifs that Swedenborg was writing about. And so the paintings are showing this parallel of birth and death, and showing a soul in transition into death. And so that is how the film is bookended as well, which I think is, there's a lot of really smart subtext in this film, which is also very pulpy.
It reminds me, or it could live in the same chapter as that movie.
I'm thinking of Ending Things.
I'm thinking of Ending.
Oh, it's nowhere near as like meta as Charlie Kaufman, but yes, it does certainly skirt into that arena quite surprisingly.
I'm just going to go through my notes quickly. I think I like James Norton. I don't think I've ever seen him in anything.
You didn't see Greta Gerwig's Little Women, and he is the lead in Agnieszka Holland's Mr. Jones, which I had reviewed. Yeah, I guess you haven't seen him in anything.
Okay. Well, anyway, I thought he was like a handsome Anthony Rapp.
Shade.
So Catherine, Amanda Seyfried's character, we were first introduced to her at this party, this going away party, and we witnessed that she's bulimic. And we also see that she has to drink like these nutrition shakes. And the shake is what is used in the end to kill her because George like drugs it to sedate her, and then that's when he kills her. I thought that was interesting. And I guess a person could read a lot into that. I didn't take the time to think about it, but when there's that sort of ubiquitous scene where the character Catherine goes to the historical society, and then like the yokels recognize her address, and they're like, "Oh, you live at that house?" And it just so happens that they're in this historical society building, and they're like, "Oh, there's actually a photograph of your house with the original owners on it." And that's when we get context into a Bible Catherine finds in the house prior to that, and like a weird ring. And we find out that the original owner was a reverend, and that they had experienced death in that house. So
she thinks at first it's the original wife that is trying to speak to her, but come to find it's the last owners, whose children, one of the adult one she has an affair with, Eddy, played by Neustaedter.
There were little interesting moments that I thought came out of nowhere, but I thought they added texture. Like at one point Catherine is having like a dream, and she pulls out like this weird eraserhead fetus out of the sink, which I didn't quite understand what that had to do with anything, but I mean, it looked cool.
I noticed a lot of films have things like that. Like, it reminded me, since we watched really recently, of Amulet, that Romuald Gary film with that, remember those like albino bats or something, also in the infrastructure of the house, I think to show that everything's poisoned, the bones and the plumbing.
There's a scene where George is masturbating after he gets all hot and heavy with
over Willis,
over the student,
Natalia Dyer,
and Catherine catches him. I thought that was funny, like the look on her face. I think he's doing it kind of with the door not closed and his daughter is downstairs.
Now that your excellent explication made me realize that it's also George Clare is kind of like a reversal of Tom Ripley from Patricia Highsmith's Ripley novels, like kind of a queer character who is manipulative in assuming the identities of others and their likenesses. Which
that's like that movie with Matt Damon. I'm not familiar with those works.
Patricia Highsmith.
The Talented Mr. Ripley.
She had a series of novels about this character, Tom Ripley.
But is that The Talented Mr. Ripley?
Yes, and there are several film versions, including Wim Wenders and one starring Alain Delon, directed by René Clément, I believe.
Well, let's get focused because this review is going to be long. The other teacher at the college who George is kind of having a flirtation with,
Rhea Seehorn.
She teaches weaving, which I thought was funny, and then you said something funny. You were like, unless it's Sigourney weaving, I don't care.
That was always...
That's such a weird sort of thing to be like, I teach weaving.
That was always kind of the disparaging joke people would make about... But I guess, sure, that was taught. I thought she was quite good. And she's married to James Urbaniak, playing Bram.
And they have an interesting scene because the four of them, they kind of have like a double date at the other couple's house, and they end up smoking weed. And then that's kind of when we see George's true colors, because they're both high, and Catherine's been drinking, and then because she doesn't eat, they get into a fight on the ride home. And then George ends up stopping the car, and then he ends up like kind of pushing her accidentally. I thought that was a really good scene.
Amanda Seyfried, I think, is, she just did receive an Oscar nomination for Mank, but I think is consistently always, even the odd clunkers she's in sometimes, always giving it her all. She's always very compelling, I think, to watch on screen. And I don't know, she's able to be transportive. Like even in that one really terrible film, I think it's a Brazilian filmmaker where her sister is missing. I think it's called Gone from like 2011, which is really a terrible film. But strangely, you watch it and it's like, oh, she's really good in every scene she's in. I liked all the textures that added a lot to this film. There's some references to Mozart's Lacrimosa, that particular requiem, the sheet music, and it plays in the soundtrack. When she's returning these library books, she's returning Sylvia Plath's Ariel, which is, a fantastic collection of poetry if you've ever read it, and kind of the the themes of Plath, I think, are also on hand in this film about this toxic heterosexual relationship.
Before the seance, George's boss explains to Catherine, because she's afraid, and he tells her, like, evil spirits only commune with evildoers. Mm-hmm. I thought that was a good line.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there are a couple really good lines. And I also really like the look of it. It was shot by Larry Smith, who's lensed many films, but notably Only God Forgives and Eyes Wide Shut. It felt very much like a film. It had the vibe of films from this era that I really like. Mm-hmm. And I think those are so few and far between, and it embraced its kind of odd weirdness, even the suspension of disbelief in the corny bits, which I think by that time I felt so kind of into the story, I didn't mind like the spirits kind of saying things that are a little too leading maybe in the finale, but other than that, I think I was very pleased with it.
What would you give it?
3.5 out of 5.
I would give it 3.5 out of 5 as well. Thank you.
Bye.